not pass a law that the governor wanted, that the vote by mail ballots could be processed and entered into the system on a rolling basis like they do in Florida about 22 days out. Pennsylvania, no. The legislature said you can't start doing anything till Election Day. So this is what you get in a big state like Pennsylvania. When the Republicans wanted it that way, now they complain it's going too slowly and so many votes are coming in. So it's a silliness because they created the situation. Now they complain about it.
Well, when you cut off your nose to spite your face, it's almost you get annoyed when others can smell the BS and you can't. Because that's what I'm seeing right now.
Absolutely, and your face doesn't look good, right?
No, and there's always the aesthetic issue about this. But I have to ask, we're all looking at the popular vote right now. We know that Biden is leading in the popular vote. He appears to be leading, therefore, in the Electoral College count. But there has been this talk, and I wonder if you are familiar with the idea of faithless electors. And people are talking about this notion of faithless electors being those members of the United States Electoral College who decide not to vote for the president or the vice presidential candidate for whom they pledged to vote. I've been hearing a little bit from people like Ron DeSantis, who's been floating this sort of faithless elector plan for places like Michigan or Pennsylvania. And I believe even Lindsey Graham was alluding in some way to the way in which you could invalidate different votes. Where do we stand in this issue of faithless electors? Is it a possibility that there could be some sort of repudiation of even this election vote tally?
Well, the answer is possibility, yes, because this summer, the U.S. Supreme Court, what their ruling is that states may require electors to support the popular vote winner. But they're not required to. They just are allowed to, and they can enforce their laws on it. So then you have these states like Pennsylvania or Florida or Georgia where you've heard threats, at least in the media, that maybe will claim when it comes time to have our electors appointed that we're going to appoint the Trump electors and not the Biden electors, even though the popular vote went the other way. But we think, not that the court has it proven, but we think there were irregularities and it wasn't a fair election, so we're going to put in our slate. So the answer is technically yes. Then what will happen with that will be litigation. It will go up to the Supreme Court. This is not a place anybody wants to go.
I think that's such a true concept because people, this idea of, and we wonder, I'm waiting like many other people in this country and across the globe to see at what point people will, sort of tap out. At what point, even if Trump does not throw in the towel, if he were to lose, at some point would the towel be thrown towards him by the Republican Party to suggest, no, you don't want to go down this road here of encouraging faithless electors for the very reasons that you're talking about from earlier about how the Republican Party in Pennsylvania didn't want to tabulate early, and now they have this dilemma of slowed and delayed tabulation. At some point, what you do in the dark will impact you when you most need it. And so I wonder if this is a conversation that we continue to have, Richard, about the days of faithless electors or conversations being numbered. But I wonder also for you, who do you think is going to ultimately decide this election? Because I know right now all the votes have been cast. They're being tabulated. We know the map and what it looks like. What is the likelihood that you see the Supreme Court ever weighing in on this issue? Are we destined to repeat Bush v. Gore, or is this really at this point apples to oranges?
I think we're apples to oranges. First of all, we have basically 6 states out there, not one like we had in Florida, because obviously he's going to go for a recount in Wisconsin. He's going to still litigate Michigan. Pennsylvania may be a recount depending on the numbers. Georgia most certainly will be a recount. Nevada and Arizona, we don't know yet. So those 6 are in play on some level, either recounts or lawsuits. This isn't Florida where you're focusing on A, one state, B, hundreds of votes as the margin, and C, it was about specific ways of counting votes because of those hanging chads and things of that nature. So what you have here is this, we can't call it a strategy. They're just throwing out these 6 states with 6 different issues for the most part and saying, okay, these generalizations happen, but I don't have evidence. But at some point, it comes down to, is it moot? Meaning, is the issue really been decided? Because if, even in Pennsylvania, if the issue goes back up to the Supreme Court about whether or not the state Supreme Court was within its power to allow the ballots to be counted 3 days after, as long as they're postmarked on Election Day, even if the Supreme Court took that, and even if the conservative majority ends up agreeing that it shouldn't have happened, you got 2 problems. Number one, you'd have to show that there's enough votes out there that would overturn Pennsylvania, because otherwise, what's the issue? It makes no difference. The court shouldn't be in the business of giving advisory opinions. Like you said, everything has to be an actual controversy and a harm that can be redressed. And number 2, why is the court looking at this when you, like I said, you don't have a difference that it could make in the election? So it's really like some kind of theoretical law school proposition. So you have to hope that Biden wins most of these 6 states, and all of this, whatever the Trump campaign tries to do with their so-called strategy, it won't make a difference anyway. And courts, generally speaking, as you know, do not like to get involved when, number one, this kind of controversy at the Supreme Court, where it could have an effect on the election if they don't have to get involved. And number 2, when it's not really a controversy, it's been decided. We don't give opinions advisory. We only give opinions if it could actually affect the turning over of the election.
Actual case and controversy, a phrase that we're going to hear a lot about, and now it's explained well, of course, by Richard C. Bell. Before you go, I have to ask you, when you think about the one aspect, and you mentioned that although none of the lawsuits that the president has filed or his campaign has filed really have any legs, the one that might have toes, I love that phrasing, is in Pennsylvania. And here's one reason I wonder about whether the Supreme Court will weigh in on that case in particular, because, as you know, they said, look, we're not going to weigh in because we can't weigh in the way you'd like. Back to that concept of relief. You wanted an expedited ruling in time for the election. We're unprepared to be able to move that fast. And even the most recent addition to the Supreme Court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, didn't even have time to be fully read up on the briefs in order to even weigh in. But they did say we could, essentially, since still before us, we could, in fact, still rule on this issue. And what people look for at this point, Richard, is the idea of, although they're not going to be deciding perhaps who won or the retabulation of things, what they may still look at is whether the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania was entitled to even extend the deadline when the state legislature said they could not, because this speaks about what the Constitution says about whose job it is to be able to decide the time, place, and manner of elections, right?
Yes, they could say that, but the other argument here is, as you know, what's called the reliance theory. And reliance theory is, okay, we disagree with that court. They should have been able to do that. But we, the Supreme Court, let it go forward. And the voters of Pennsylvania relied on the fact they were doing the right thing by making sure it was postmarked by Election Day and it would get counted for 3 days after. So basically, the Supreme Court told you what you were doing was legal, and now what? Retroactively, they're going to take away your vote? That would be outrageous to me.
That's a great point, especially since they were the ones who could have weighed in earlier and did not, and they contributed to that public reliance by saying, well, the Supreme Court didn't say I couldn't, so let's just keep moving. Great point. We'll see what happens, of course, because you know what? Until the fat lady sings and sings and sings, we all got to hold our breath still, because we got a long way to go in figuring out what's going to happen between now and January 20th. Richard C. Bell, thank you for your time, as always. Great to hear from you and learn from you as well.
Oh, no, Laura, thank you. It's always an honor to be on your show, and keep doing the great work that you do.
Thank you. You as well. Keep fighting the good fight. We'll be right back after a quick break. That was Richard C. Bell, author of the new book, Voting, the Ultimate Act of Resistance. And man, isn't that true? We'll be right back.